Hello my friends, welcome. If you're new here, I'm Lindy and I have got 5 great books to tell you about today. Some books that I finished recently, but before I get to them, I want to tell you about some biblio adventures. Starting with my appearance on Shelly Swearengen's channel. She's been doing this series of Superlative Sundays, and I had the opportunity to talk to her about a superlative book. It was great to spend more time talking about a book that I really love. If you've been watching my channel, you know that I normally only speak for a minute or two about each book. So I had a chance to do a deep dive into a fabulous book. If you're interested, want to know what book it is and you haven't seen that video yet, I'm going to link it down below. On Friday, I had an evening out at the theater. I went to see a marionette show for adults. Ronnie Berkett's Theater of Marionettes. Berkett does very gay shows, and as we were waiting in line to show our ticket to go into the theater, I asked my friend to take a photo when I looked over my shoulder because, as I said, very gay. Now, Berkett's marionettes tend to be kind of risque. They're not for kids. This particular show was called Little Willy. It's a Shakespeare-themed variety show. And I have some images of the puppets that I can pop in here so you can see how elaborate their costumes are with embroidery. He does little teeny tiny Blunstons for the lesbians, you know, that kind of thing. If you've never experienced Ronnie Berkett's shows and this sounds at all interesting to you, check out the link below because he performs all over Canada and the US. So maybe you can catch one of his shows one of these days. And you might remember a while back I talked about Braiding Sweetgrass, the young adult adaptation that was done by Monique Gray Smith. The original author is Wab Kinew, and when I talked about it, I was really disappointed, but I did watch a learning event online. It was aimed at educators, and I'm really glad that I watched it because Monique Smith explained that she had to cut the words down to just a third of the original words, and that was, to me, one of the flaws of the young adult adaptation is that there's not enough context left. And another thing that I found was that it was aimed at a very young audience. And sure enough, I found out from this online event, it is supposed to be for ages 9 to 19. Now, 9-year-olds, yes, that totally makes sense to me. 9, 10, 11-year-olds, which is what I had recommended, I think, when I was talking about this book, because as far as I'm concerned, older teens should be perfectly capable of reading the original, unless they're reading at a lower grade level or something like that. So I'll link that event below for those of you who are interested. And now I'm getting on to the books that I have finished. Saving the best for last, but this first one I also gave 5 stars to. The Outer Harbour. It's a interconnected collection of stories by Wayde Compton. The stories are set in Vancouver, and Vancouver is practically a character. It's not new. It came out in 2014, won the City of Vancouver Book Prize at that time, but I find that it's still fresh. The setting of these stories start in 2001 and go up to 2024. So the science fiction aspect of them, I think, helps. But the other reason why they're relevant, sadly, is because the social issues that are being addressed, the anti-immigration attitudes, the racialized class conflict and police brutality, riots, those are unfortunately still of concern in Vancouver and other parts of Canada. Most of the characters in here are of mixed ethnic background, often part black, which Wayde Compton is as well. And these characters are often artists who are using their art and performances as part of their activism. The stories themselves are in a lot of different styles. There's straightforward narratives, there's a journalistic style, there's transcripts as if from a radio broadcast, there's a series of posters, there are drawings. One section is like a pamphlet from a real estate firm. So yeah, there's lots of variety in the way that this narrative is presented. It's the kind of thing that I find really engaging and exciting. And one of the things that happens is a new volcano erupts in the middle of Barrhead Inlet, so just in the harbour next to Vancouver. And of course that made me think of another book that I love, My Volcano by John Elizabeth Stintzi. Although the volcano in this book erupts in Central Park in New York City. But both books imagine future possibilities, and that is such an important role, I think, for fiction. I also thought of André Forget's book, The City of Pigs, because artist activism and affordable housing are important issues as well in the Outer Harbour. Here's a sample of the posters that you'll find in this book and drawings. And I'm going to read just a little bit from a transcript. Radio Free Northwest. Migrants have been detained and one young person has died. The host of the radio show is Lena Byrne, and she's interviewing a journalist named Peter Hammond. LB. Now, the death of this girl. I'm sorry, but do we know her name? Reports say it is unknown. PH. They have given the migrants numbers until names can be ascertained. To be honest, I can't bring myself to use a number to speak of her. LB. Understood. Tell us what you know about the night leading up to her death. Whew. It seems like migration is coming up a lot in the books that I've been reading lately. Next, I'm going to tell you about an audiobook, The Everlasting Road by Wab Kinew, who is Ojibwe from Manitoba. Actually, he's from a reserve in Ontario. He's lived in Manitoba for a long time. He's actually the leader of the Manitoba New Democrat Party, and he is a member of the Legislative Assembly. And he also finds time to write books. This is actually book number 2 in the Floraverse series. The first one is Walking in Two Worlds. Bugs is back. I recommend, if you're interested, read the first book before you go into this second one. But I liked it even better than the first. There's a slight futurism, this Floraverse, the virtual world where people around the world participate in this game. That's where Bugs goes to escape. But when she's in the real world, it's very realistic. She's dealing with haters on social media, the culture police. She's dealing with the grief from the death of her brother, and it's really culturally sensitive as well to the Anishinaabe way of life. At the end of the audiobook, there are lots of resources listed for mental health. Mental health is a big issue in the novel as well. I would say that this story is suitable for age 12 all the way up to adult. The audiobook narrator is Michelle Bardach, who is Squamish. She does a great job, yeah. And next up is a book of nonfiction, When We Were Trans, A New History of Gender by Kit Heyam. Kit is trans, non-binary. This is what they say. I want a way of doing history that approaches both people in the past and people in the present with respect, care, and love. So what they're looking at is trans history in the presence of gender non-conforming fashion and gender non-conforming performance and people who are taking social roles in history that are not usually associated with people of the gender they were assigned at birth. I took so many notes. So for example, many of the rights and protections that gay and lesbian people enjoy now were gained through a process of emphasizing that they were just like everybody else. This meant silencing, rejecting, or excluding trans people alongside feminine gay men and masculine lesbians, groups who were disproportionately working class, all of whom were perceived to undermine that aim. They talk about the places where intersex history and trans history intersect and the ways, important ways that they diverge. Just one of the many things that caught my interest was a section talking about the civilians who were imprisoned during the First World War in the UK, Germans and other non-British citizens when England was at war. So there were something like 20 or 22,000 men between the ages of 17 and 55 in one internment camp called Knockalow on the Isle of Man. And the camp commander was a pacifist, and it was important to him that for their mental health, these people who were imprisoned would have something to do. And so in addition to creative craft kinds of things, there was also the opportunity for theater. And there ended up being 20 different theaters at Knockalow, and there were a lot of people that spent the entire day involved in some aspect of preparing for performances and giving performances, including people who performed the female roles. This is an example of how people can have different reasons for donning clothing of the gender that they weren't assigned at birth. And the author looks at how for some of these people, the wearing the clothing and then even when not performing, living life as the gender that they weren't assigned at birth could have various reasons. And after the camps closed when the war was over. They may have gone back to living as men, or maybe not. So this is all very interesting parts of trans history. Here's another section that I flagged. As someone whose 6-foot height and size 10 feet constantly marked me out as different when I was living as female, and who could sing the tenor part in my choir long before I started taking testosterone, I felt an unexpected pang of disappointment when my endocrinologist's report declared my blood tests to be entirely in line with the gender I was assigned at birth. As I mentioned in my introduction, this is the dangerous flip side of the born this way argument. It can lead us to think that trans identities are more valid or only valid if they have a proven biological cause. So much great stuff in here. Before We Were Trans by Heyam. Next up, another work of nonfiction, Design as Art by the Italian designer and graphic artist Bruno Munari. He died in the 1990s, so this is considered a classic. It's a collection of short essays that originally appeared as a newspaper columns. There are lots of images in here. It's quite funny and thought-provoking and informative, but it is also dated, both in the language and in some of the ideas. So this was originally published in 1966 as a collection and then translated in 1970. I'll have the translator information down below. So in one section where he's talking about how 10 years ago radios used to be the size of sofas. Yeah, it was a long, long time ago. In another section titled, An Arrow Can Lose Its Feathers but Not Its Point, where you can see the progression of arrows used as direction symbols. If there is an object known to everyone, even to savages, and one that can be used to indicate direction, that object is the arrow. I would really hope that a contemporary book would not be referring to anybody as savages. Some of the photos are really dark, almost impossible to see what's going on in them. Some examples of chair designs, faces. I like that. I also went down a lot of rabbit holes. Like he mentions Le Corbusier's square spiral museum. I had to check out that design online. He has very strong opinions about things. Here's a section titled, What is Bamboo? I will not say that all Japanese craftsmen are good, but most of them are. They have tradition behind them. Of course, there are also those who ape Western styles, using bamboo for abstract decorations that might just as well have been made out of plastic tubing. Such workmen simply show their lack of intelligence. I really loved his tongue-in-cheek description of peas and what a good design they are. The color is, in point of fact, green. And moreover, a green of the well-known type, popularly known as pea green. The choice of this color was a sound one, introduced when production was first started. It has held its own against all rivals until the present day. There's another section where he talks about what a great thing chopsticks are, and we should be using them around the world because you can just throw them away and don't have to wash them. That's another example of outdated attitudes. One of his ideas is to create art by inserting things into a slide projector, like a dragonfly wing or bits of colored plastic, and make art that way. He's got a lot of innovative ideas, that's for sure. I call this a soft pick. I'm interested in the topic, but it's dated. Last up, the best of the bunch, is this book, The Sentimentalist by Johanna Skibsrud. Now, I did this as a buddy read with Melissa of Fully Booked and Sarah, who is Sing Out on Litzy. We haven't done our final check-in, so I'm thinking that they will just hold off before watching this section. But no spoilers anyway. I'm just not sure what their final reactions are. I loved it. 5 stars. Deserving of the Gillard Prize. It was published in 2010. I was given this copy as a gift shortly after that, and it's been sitting on my shelf ever since. It's the cover. That's the reason why I haven't picked it up before now. This soldier on the cover, I'm just like, not interested. If it would have had one of these other covers, which I found online, that emphasize that a lot of the story takes place on the shores of a lake. It's a man-made lake that was created as part of the St. Lawrence Seaway being expanded, and a town was drowned, so all the people got moved to a new place. And that theme of buried memories is all through the book. Yeah, I find these covers way more appealing. Once I started reading, I was 100% in. It is written in a very non-linear style, kind of fractured, with gorgeous language, long sentences. Here's an example. So that even in those after years, when my father had disappeared completely beyond the line of our horizon, it seemed as though on fine days I could see him still, a faint outline, a trace of himself, buoyed by the stubbornness of my memory, walking tentatively along the endless and otherwise uninhabited waters of my childhood. Napoleon as a soldier, as a young man in the Vietnam War. His friend Owen was killed in Vietnam. Something traumatic happened there. His daughter, who's about 30, is the narrator of the story. We never do learn her name. She has a sister, Helen, and her mom, but the trauma that her father experienced has also affected his wife and the next generation. He doesn't talk about the war until in his final year of life. I think he's in his 70s, and that's the time that this is set, when his daughter is asking him more questions. She's not getting a lot of answers, but he does speak a little bit about what happened. There's a lot of things that remain ambiguous. So that's another thing to know about this novel. I saw on Goodreads that the average rating was something like 2.7. A lot of people obviously do not like it. Obviously not a book for everyone, but I really resonated with the emotions in here. You don't get to know the narrator very well, except through what her emotions are. And it's the same with her father, with her sister. The dialogue between them is so real. I was there, and I find the lack of communication, that desire to know our family members better, but being frustrated that you can't quite do that, was just so real. So it's a melancholy story, and it is beautiful. Yeah. The original edition was only 2,500 copies. It was printed by Gaspereau Press, not this edition, but Gaspereau uses a letterpress. They make beautiful books. When it won the Giller, people couldn't buy it, and so Douglas and McIntyre stepped in and helped out by printing this just regular trade paperback edition. The edition that I do not recommend is audio. Both Melissa and Sarah had the audio edition, and I also listened to it in audio. I listened to the whole thing in audio, and I read the entire book. It was interesting to compare the two, actually. One of the things that the audio narrator did was contracted a whole bunch of words. Like, instead of saying would not, she said wouldn't, did not, didn't, those kinds of contractions. When the original text does not have them, I think that it really changes an aspect of the storytelling, that our narrator is repressed, speaks quite formally, and by putting those contractions in there, it shifts things a little bit. So yeah, there's that. But that wasn't the thing that Melissa and Sarah didn't like. They said that the audio narrator, I just didn't care for the tone, and I wasn't very keen on her either. So, pro tip, go for the print. And that's it for the books that I've got to tell you about. Stick around if you're interested in birthday cake and going out of town to just be amongst the trees and the snow, because it was our friend's birthday and I made a birthday cake. The sprinkles that I had to decorate were a mix of pink, blue, and purple. And our friend does not like pink, so I was listening to an audiobook and I carefully separated out all of the pink, so there was no pink on the cake. I have a few scenes of what it was like out at their place in the country. Their property has a river that runs alongside, and it was a gorgeous day, blue sky, it was above zero. So yeah, it was good to get out of the city. Thank you all for watching. I look forward to your comments down below, and I hope to see you soon.
Find Mr. Holt's house tomorrow.
Yes? Up on the hill? I don't think we can see it from the river.
I'm sure we can't even record her in.